everyone. My name is Nermina. It's such a pleasure being in Sarajevo for such a special occasion. And as all outlined today, we're going to do a deep dive into music and also explore my way from math to music and explore also how we leverage AI to power the monetization of music streaming. So music is part of our everyday lives, whether it's on our daily commute to work, whether we go running or on a party. And by the way, yesterday's playlist was great. It's just part of our DNA of being humans. And the thing is, it's just part of our everyday lives. How I came into the music business was not as a singer or a songwriter. It was actually the nerdy path of coming into the music business as a researcher. I studied technical mathematics at Vienna University of Technology. Then I was working as a consultant in the industry and came back to university to do a PhD research on fraud detection in music streaming. And my first research paper turned out to become eventually a music startup. So, and what I realized when starting the research is music is not only very emotional for everyone, it's a very tough business. And a couple of days ago, I just came back from Nashville, which is the epicenter of country music. And Dolly Parton is a very well-known country singer. And once Dolly Parton said, my songs are like my children. I expect them to support me when I'm old. So how come songs can be considered as a pension fund? So if you're a singer or a songwriter, you do a song, and whenever this song is streamed on a streaming service or played on television or radio, a royalty is induced. And for this copyright that you have, depending on the copyright, it's valid up to 70 years. So for 70 years, you're going to be earning money whenever the song is played. And as a kid of Bosnian parents, we know these are very high expectations to say, my children should take care of me, so these songs should better perform and be the best in their playlists. But it wasn't only Dolly Parton considering her songs as a commodity. Currently, there is also a huge run on music assets from the financial industry. So during the pandemic, the financial industry discovered that music IP seems to be a very crisis-resilient asset class. Why? Because even if shit hits the fan, people consider and they continue listening to music. And so throughout the pandemic, streaming kept increasing and rocketing. And they were like, okay, let's put some money into this industry, and started buying music assets. And as you see here, not only Wall Street, but also investment funds started investing bazillions of dollars into music rights. And it's not only pizza money that musicians earn with the music. We're talking of millions and billions of dollars. For instance, Queen is on sale currently for estimated $1 billion. Justin Bieber recently sold his rights for $200 million. And so it's really not only pizza money. And this is the way it's continuing. But the question is, how do you come up with these price tags? And how do you determine the value of music assets? And to go into depth, I will take a step back first and maybe do a deep dive on the music business to understand how it evolved, how it works, to understand the specifics a little better. So actually, streaming saved the music industry. Okay, the clicker should work. So this graph actually outlines the market size of the music industry over the years. And here the red bars that you see is physical music, namely CDs and vinyl, if you're old enough to remember that. And the blue bars are music streaming. So what you see here drastically is the replacement of physical by digital, and you see also that digitalization of music actually saved the music industry. And I remember my co-founder was in the music industry for 30 years, and he remembers the party at conferences in the early 2000s, and he was like, that was the golden age of music, and back then they were doing the parties on yachts and boats, and they were lighting the cigars with $100 notes. And he told me, starting from the 2000s, year by year, the boats got smaller, and then they eventually disappeared, and with streaming they came back. And it's not a coincidence that it correlates with the time when Spotify came to the market. So you see, the biggest income source of the music industry right now is streaming. But how does streaming actually work? So going back to the example of being a singer, a songwriter, one would assume that they put the music directly on streaming services like Spotify, Apple, Deezer, and they get their royalties. Should be easy, right? But in reality, it's rarely the case that it works like that, because the music industry is a pretty complex ecosystem. So you see that, first of all, artists and songwriters are considered two separate entities because it comes to publishing and recording. And secondly, between them and the streaming service, there is a very long chain of intermediaries, from distributors, labels, managements, on the publishing side, collection societies and publishers. And it has its reasons historically why it is so. Just one example, I mean, labels used to be historically kind of the marketing machine for artists. So it's reasonable to have them in between. But that makes the ecosystem at the same time pretty complex and induces a couple of challenges, which I want to touch upon very briefly. So one of them is the payout models. So currently the prevailing model is the pro rata system. How does it work? So you can consider that, for instance, in Spotify, all the subscription fees are coming into a pot, then you add the advertising income, and then this pot is allocated aliquotly according to the number of streams. So the more streams you have, the more you get out of the pot. But this model is currently challenged by other suggestions, like the user-centric model, which is used by, for instance, Deezer, where, let's say, if I only stream Justin Bieber, all my subscription fees are going directly to Justin Bieber, or other models that are more artist-focused and fan-focused. So the second thing is the rights ownership. The music industry is super complex. When I entered the industry, I was like, okay, guys, I need a law degree to understand what is going on here. That makes it, again, very challenging. Plus, also currently the development with AI-generated content, inducing, again, the question of how should be streaming remunerated? Should, for instance, AI-generated songs get the same royalties as, let's say, songs produced and recorded by real human beings? That's a big question right now in the music industry. But no matter what you're discussing, all these challenges boil down to data and data quality. Because no matter what payout system you choose, it really depends on how many streams were induced. No matter what rights you consider, whether it's recording rights, publishing rights, sync rights, neighboring rights, it's at the end of the day, how often was the song played? And the same with AI-generated content. And now when we're talking of data, Okay, one back. That's an important question. But when it comes to data, there are skyrocketing amounts of data right now with streaming, with the digitalization coming in. So we're talking of $17 billion of revenues produced by music streaming, and that is approximately 15 billion streams per day. So we're talking about a shitload of data. And with all this data, okay, does it work? Okay. All right, now I got it. The question is, where's the money and where's the money going? So as a music right holder, you have basically two important questions. Number one, did I collect all my royalties correctly historically? So the question is auditing. And question number two is, What is the value of my music? So if I have to put a price tag on the IP, what is the value? And now considering the complex landscape of music streaming, and considering that the royalties have to go down from the streaming service to the artist or to the songwriter, there's a lot of room for error, considering that 15 billion streams per day are going through this reporting chain. And also considering that all these intermediaries are historically not the most tech-savvy ones. So, and now I want to walk you through a couple of examples what can go wrong with reporting and what issues we find when it comes to collecting royalties. A headline that you came across very often probably is fake plays. What are fake plays? So these are bots that over and over again stream the same music. You can buy them in some countries of these worlds. And they induce fake plays. And the problem is following, as we considered the pro-rata system, that the more streams you have, the more you get out of the pot. So if you generate fake plays, automatically you get more out of the pot, which takes away the royalties or the organic royalties of another artist. And so this is an example that we had with one of our clients. Who of you is into German rap? Okay, nice. So we had the case with a German rapper who approached us as thinking that one of his opponents is actually buying fake plays for him. Why? Because if streaming services discover that your streams are fraudulent, they take down your music and they won't pay you any royalties. So that was a strategy of dealing with your opponents. And eventually we really discovered that fake plays were induced on a certain streaming platform, and that's typical where you see skyrocketing streams or streams from almost nothing to huge peaks, but it also depends on the platform. So for instance, on TikTok, you have these kind of viral effects which you wouldn't expect on other platforms to see. And according to different estimates, we know that approximately 10% of all streams might be fraudulent. So another problem that we oftentimes come across is missing reports. So what does it mean? You see, for instance, here the normal streaming counts over time, and you see this drops in certain periods in time. Why is this happening? What we see, sometimes it really happens because reports are not imported correctly, or data matching is going wrong. But what we also observed is for several streaming services that they really, across the board, through different artists and labels, fail to deliver reports on time. And these kind of instances make up approximately 11% of all anomalies that we were tracking. So another thing is, for instance, unusual streaming patterns. Because what we do is a so-called performance fingerprinting. So for each track in each territory, we analyze what is the usual streaming consumption pattern for this particular track in this particular territory. And that way we analyze what a statistically normal streaming consumption should look like, and we can determine some structural breaks in the data, as you see it here, which amount of up to 5% deviation in the streaming consumption payout. Another instance is unusual monetization. What does it mean? So different streaming services have a different payout rate, and that also varies over time. What you would like to see is something like here. Here we have 3 territories. We have France, UK, and Japan, and you have a payout of around 1 cent per stream, which is actually quite okay. With other streaming services, it's 1/3 of a cent or even less. So, and what you would like to see is something like here, pretty stable over time, maybe a different magnitude for different countries. But again, a case from, this was a US rapper who bought back some of his master rights, and we were involved in the due diligence and analyzing his data. Okay. We realized something very interesting for a specific streaming service, that here in Japan, you suddenly didn't have a payout of 1 cent per stream, but rather $1.2 per stream. So they ended up paying out way more than they should. This is also one of the typical issues that we come across. Okay. We got it. And so how do we come up with these anomalies, and how does this anomaly tracking work? So first of all, we start with financial statements from different streaming services, and they are usually not the cleanest. To give you an example, recently we had a client giving us a folder structure of 15,000 Excel spreadsheets, asking us, please, can you help us with the accounting? So number one is collecting all the data and cleaning the data. Secondly, we run our AI engine that does this so-called performance fingerprinting. So automatically analyzing what is a normal or statistically normal streaming consumption. And based on that, we do the auditing, namely checking if royalties were paid out correctly historically, and secondly, providing a valuation, which looks like that. For instance, for a particular song, we get the numbers in. No? Yeah, the cleaning is already done. So we replace the anomalies with what we expect would be normal values for the auditing. And that way we create a very clean historical baseline. To do what? To do the projections. Because as outlined, every copyright is valid for instance, 70 years. And if you are to sell your music as a buyer, you want to know how this song is very likely going to perform in the next couple of years. And then they do a kind of discounted cash flow analysis to determine what is the value right now. And what you want to avoid is having kind of fake plays in your historical data. Why? Because they're inflating the value of your catalog, because then you might be overestimating what you might be earning in the future. Or you want to clean out some missing reporting and some anomalies in the streaming consumption. Why? Because this is something you might be able to recollect through auditing, and that way you can uncover hidden value in the catalog and see what you can be squeezing out additionally, which at the end of the day yields in an information advantage when it comes to bidding for catalogs. And at the end of the day, more precision in the forecast. And so far, we analyzed a lot of data from a lot of industry players that allowed us to get a very comprehensive picture of the streaming landscape. And there were a couple of findings that I would love to share with you. So far, we analyzed over 800 billion streams across the globe, really coming from major labels, from indies, from publishers, auditors, distribution companies, M&A teams. So really across the board, which allowed us to get a very comprehensive picture. And ultimately, we validated over $700 million in royalties. And there were a couple of findings. So number one, we detected empirically a deviation of 6% in the revenue reporting. What does it mean? If you project it on the entire streaming market, we are talking about more than $1 billion in revenues that are potentially not paid out correctly. And what we also realized, when you're thinking of where is this deviation coming from, I would say it's not really intentional fraud or fraudulent activity. Mostly what we see, it's really very, very poor data quality. And the further you go down the reporting chain, the messier the data gets. To give you an example, streaming services report on a daily basis to distribution companies. Distributors aggregate the statements, provide financial reports to labels. They do that on a monthly basis. So labels get reporting monthly. The labels then report to management companies, and they ultimately give the reports to the artist. What artists mostly get out is really once in 6 months, they get a statement indicating how many streams they had and what revenues they earned. And so there is a huge difference in receiving daily data to just biannually data. And through all these aggregation processes, we see lots of technical mistakes happening. And also an interesting fact that we observed is there are also DSP, country and genre typical differences in the reporting. So we see streaming services that have lower discrepancies than other streaming services, and we happen to observe that across several of our clients. But we also see territory differences. So some territories with discrepancies of up to 15%. DSP-wise, DSP standing for Digital Service Provider, which is the streaming service, we see some streaming services that have discrepancies less of 1%, while we see others that have discrepancies up to 10%. And also genre-wise, we see that some genres seem to be more prone to anomalies than others. So, and why is AI now so important? It's so important because there is another trend that we observe in the music industry, which is the big empowerment of the indie sector and the strengthening of the indies. If we take a look at the industry, music streaming is currently approximately an $18 billion industry, and 1/3 of the entire industry is the indies. But if we now consider, for instance, Spotify and take a look at how many artists they have there, they have approximately 11 million Spotify artists. But if you take a look how many of them can actually make a living, and there they took the threshold of 50K per year, it's only 0.2% of the artists on Spotify that can actually make a living. So there is a huge ocean of small artists that earn under 50K per year, for whom it is even more important having the validation tools in place and also the tools in place to make sure they earn correct royalties than it's for others. And that way we really aim to democratize the access to validation and auditing tools and really empower also the indie artists to make a living out of the streaming. Thank you.
Is it okay? Okay, cool. Now it is your time to analyze the analyst with some questions. Please.
Thank you. I did some research in trying to connect AI with music, and I saw that traditional algorithms did the best results. So, in your opinion, for this kind of thing, is it better to use traditional algorithms like SVM or something like that, or is it better to use DeepMind or neural networks and stuff like that?
So, could you repeat the first sentence, please?
Is it better to use traditional algorithms like SVM, KNN, or some new things in this part of research? Because thing that I did shown that SVM gave better results.
So I think it's very difficult to give a very general answer, because first of all, it depends on the data that you have available. Secondly, it depends on what is your research question. So, and depending on what is your research question and what data you have available, you're going to go for a method set. So, I mean, support vector machines and neural networks are typically used for classification purposes. When it comes, for instance, to fraud detection, I mean, I can elaborate a bit on that. Of course, then you would go for classification techniques. But the problem, particularly when it comes to fraud detection, going for classification techniques, is that for classification you need labeled data. So you need labels for, is this an organic streaming activity? Is this a fraudulent streaming activity? And the problem is that you have very little labeled data for fraud detection. So when it comes to the method approach, it's like you have imbalanced labels. So you have just a very small proportion of fraudulent data versus organic data. And that's why any classification approach might be difficult. In that case, you would rather switch from supervised learning approaches to unsupervised learning approaches that at the end of the day require more mathematical modeling. So that's just an example of, depending on what data you have available, you can stick to certain method sets or you need to switch to different method sets. Yeah, but as I said, it's very difficult to generalize an answer.
Okay. Thank you so much for presenting this unique topic so interestingly. I would like to hear more about the topic of fake plays, and does fake play, is it a topic of cybersecurity, or how? Yeah, the second part of that question, sorry, my brain is all over the place. The second part of the question about fake plays is how did TikTok and virality of TikTok impact the phenomenon of fake plays?
I mean, fake plays are a huge topic in the industry, as I said, because of the current payout system. So by inducing fake plays, you really take away a share of other artists. So also streaming services particularly put a focus on detecting what is fraudulent streaming activity, and which boils down to detecting or finding patterns of what is a normal streaming consumption, and then really go down to the user profiles and tracking what is normal for that user profile to stream or don't stream. But it's a huge economy, which is costing the music industry. I mean, there are different estimates, but it's going into the hundreds of millions of dollars. That's really costing the music industry. So that's the first question. And the second one was?
If you're familiar with it, how did TikTok and TikTok's virality impact the whole topic of fake plays?
For me, it's difficult to tell how it impacts fake plays. I mean, you have certain viral effects on TikTok going on, but what we do see in the data that viral effects on TikTok and also these spikes on TikTok, such spikes that you have seen here, induce an uplift on other streaming services. So if you want to explain some spikes happening on other streaming services, it's usually a very good indication to go back to TikTok and take a look at what was happening there, because you see with a certain time lag, then an uplift, for instance, then happening on services like YouTube and Spotify.
I'm also going to talk about the fake plays. I have a question. So, how can we detect if somebody was using a fake play, but not creating a spike, but using a fake bot to play like during 1 month, maybe to have some small plays that are continuously increasing? Mm-hmm. How can that be detected? And what would be the appropriate measure to take if somebody is found guilty of using fake plays? Because as you mentioned that sometimes that streaming services can take away their music, but what if somebody uses fake plays on his competition to get them deleted from the streaming service? And also, thank you so much for the great presentation. It was amazing.
Well, I mean, the example I showed was a very illustrative example and a very extreme case. And if you see that, it's more or less obvious. Then you just need the machine to detect these kind of spikes for the scale. And of course, there are less obvious examples of fake plays. And also the fraudsters, what we observe, are becoming more and more clever and trying to figure out ways how to work around the fraud detection systems, also of the streaming services, but also other systems in place. So of course there are patterns that are less obvious. And to give you an example, also with the artists that we worked with, we also saw that fake play activity happening on a streaming service in the US, but the threshold where the streaming service detected or flagged the fake plays was so high, and the fake play induction was actually so low that it was still continuing on the streaming service. But the bottom line is fraudsters get more clever, and of course the patterns become less obvious. So it's a continuous work to continue detecting new patterns of fraudulent streaming activity. Yes.
Hi from me as well. My question is, I've seen a couple of days ago modeling agencies using AI to create artificial models, and then they're using these models to promote their products and stuff, and they're earning money. They don't have to work with other people, work with real models, pay them, and etc. If the music industry goes on that path, and streaming companies start using AI to create music, stop working with the creators, if it happens, and I don't know what the possibility is for that to happen, how will it affect the creators of music, like real life creators?
That's currently a huge discussion in the music industry, AI-generated content. Because even if you generate content with AI, you have to train the model, and how do you train it? And does, for instance, music by genuine artists go into the training data, and who is then owning the copyright? So it's a huge discussion. And what is happening is there is a big proportion of content and streaming services out there which is generated by AI. So many people are very interested in shedding a light on what that proportion is. And that's why the huge question arises again, how should this content be remunerated? Of course, where also algorithms, etc., are used as kind of pushing content, or also the question of how you can make your own content more visible, how to get onto playlists. But I feel like there are many, many applications for pushing content.
Can I just get a follow-up question regarding if artists themselves decide to use AI to make their jobs a little bit easier? Are they going to get paid a little bit less? In your opinion, what should it be? Should they be paid a little bit less, or should it stay the same if they use AI to get a little lighter job?
Being very frank, we're super agnostic about that, because Legitary, we're an analytics company. We do the analysis and we provide the evidence. And so I also wouldn't take a stance on it should be remunerated this or that way. I feel like it's currently a big also political discussion in the music business, how it should be remunerated. That should be left to the people in charge. What we provide is the evidence based on data.
Hello. How do you feel about the survivability of streaming? I'm here. How do you feel about the survivability of streaming services? You mentioned Spotify completely taking over the market and boosting the streaming services to where it was before. But historically, Spotify only operated on us up until this year, where next to music, they needed to introduce podcasts and videos, whereas Apple Music or Google Play Music has an entire industry behind it where they can offload those operating costs.
It's super difficult for a streaming service also to become profitable. I mean, as you say, the numbers are very obvious. And thinking of how does it work, it's like streaming services, they fill the pot with the subscription fees and also with the marketing. And approximately 70% of that pot is really then going ultimately to the music right holders. So approximately they just have 30% to cover the operating costs, which is not a lot. And so from what I have observed is, or what is obvious from the market is, I mean, there was a run on content because it's also about remaining competitive. And that's why they started buying content like, as you said, podcasts, etc. Because at the end of the day, it makes someone subscribe rather to a streaming service where I have also my ebooks available, my podcasts, my music. So it's about staying competitive. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Any more questions on the board? Okay. For any ones that may arise, in the meantime, you are free to approach Nermina at your wish when you find the inspiration to.